do we know anything about um, the influence of sexual education in schools, relationship training, pastoral care in schools, in the education system generally speaking? We had a program in Australia, an anti-bullying program. It was called Safe Schools. Became very controversial indeed. And an independent review found that it inflated the percentage of people who were allegedly transgender, and it taught children, encouraged them in the view that their gender is entirely up to them. To what extent can we know whether schools are partially responsible, or what's happening in our schools for
Right.
this
So part of
whole
the
issue?
investigation I did was into the public school system, and I looked at California, which is, probably our most progressive public school system. And I found that they were teaching from kindergarten up this very radical gender ideology. Started, with 5-year-olds, preschool, what we call kindergarten, and all through the school system. And of course, this encourages the idea that if there's something, it teaches kids outright that only they know their true gender. And there's a whole system in the school ready and waiting for them to declare one of their exotic gender identities and then to fill out a form so that they promise to keep this from the parents. So this has definitely been going on in America. And of course, then when the young person reaches adolescence and goes through a period of distress and sometimes, feels bad about themselves, the idea that their source of their distress is gender readily leaps to mind.
Then you must have a lot of parents coming to you. You really must, asking for advice. How do I handle this? What general advice do you, and can you safely give without ending up on the wrong side of the law, let alone public opinion?
Sure.
What do you
Well, I'm
say to
not.
parents?
Okay. I am. I'm flooded with parents. I have so many parents. I probably have talked to well over 1,000 parents at this point. But there are a few things that I tell. I mean, first of all, I'm not a psychologist. I always say that. But a few things I do think, certainly pushing back on gender ideology in the schools is a must. I think depending on the age of your daughter, getting her off social media is really important. And this is perhaps the most important thing of all. You know, trust yourself as the parent. If a so-called expert is leading your daughter or child down a path that you don't think is right for her, trust yourself to know better than these experts. Because these so-called experts are doing, at this rate, I think a lot of them are doing more harm than good.
And yet they seem to be on the winning side. I'd imagine you see health professionals right around the world now who dare to challenge this, finding that they're not just on the outer, that their careers are somehow damaged by it.
Right. So it's true. They got a big head start because a lot of parents, especially liberal parents who were more open-minded to these experts, I think in America, they took their children in good faith to these so-called experts who they couldn't imagine would go behind their backs in this way. But unfortunately, a lot of these social workers, therapists, teachers were convinced that these short amount of time they spent with the child, maybe as little as 45-minute session, 45-minute session per week, that was enough to know that the child was transgender, and they were willing to help the child in secret to figure out how to transition. That has been going on in America for some time, and it's led to the explosion. It's part of what's led to the explosion that we're seeing.
I know the research in Australia shows that one of the top of mind issues amongst voters in this country is in fact ideology, as they put it. It might be loosely called in the classroom. And it reflects that deep fear of not knowing where they stand and how to deal with the whole situation. If their child comes home and says, I'm trapped in the wrong body, it's a very, very frightening thing for people to have to deal with, because it's only 15 years ago the idea would not have occurred to people as logical and defensible. Now you're somehow evil and wicked and outside the circle of respectability if you dare to question these ideas. It's very, very confusing for parents and for the broader community.
Yes, and I think Look, the reason at the end of the day my book has always, generated so much, alarm is really because it reaches parents across both, across the political aisles. My book is not a conservative book. It's not a liberal book. It really is a common sense investigation for, that a lot of parents and even adolescents have really found benefits them. And because it's not easy to pigeonhole, because it really isn't about any one policy. I don't advocate for a political, any political outcomes in the book, because it's just an investigation that has really changed the minds of a lot of parents. The activists really want to shut it down.
Well, if you argue, as I would, that politics is and should be downstream of culture, politics shouldn't come into it. This ought to be a matter, for our real lives apart from politics, and politics ought to reflect the community's views on these things. But there's the problem with social media in many ways is it's given a microphone, a megaphone, beyond anybody's wildest imaginations for the propagandization of extraordinary views and taking them forward. How we wind that back in an age like this, it's a really tough question. But are you optimistic that we might have reached a high watermark here, that the whole thing there's so much overreach, for want of a better word, that people might say, whoa, come on, we're going to back off. We're going to retreat to something a bit more sensible here?
I don't know. It's hard for me to express optimism, but I will say this, that it's important that we, as you say, leave politics downstream from this. This isn't about politics. Our young people are getting so harmed by social media in so many different ways. And one of them is that they're being exposed and really soaking in these really radical ideologies. And they're just not spending enough time with each other. Now they're self-harming in rates we've never seen before. I mean, what will it take to pull young people from these devices? And I think the answer is going to have to be parents finally putting their foot down.
Yeah. Well, look, I can only say to you, I salute your courage and your determination, and I think what you're doing is incredibly important.
Thank you.
You're saying, when you say that you're not quite sure how this is going to play out, that in itself is quite chilling, but at least you won't have to die wondering whether you saw a problem and didn't seek to address it. And I just think what you've had to say is incredibly valuable, as is the book, which of course I recommend to anybody watching or listening to our conversation. I can't thank you enough and salute you enough for what you're doing.
Thank you. That's very kind. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you value vital conversations like this one, please like, share, subscribe, and join the conversation.